Time no longer. Chapter 11 Christianity. There appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and a crown upon her head of 12 stars. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Revelation 12:1 and 6. Christ established his own church, the Christian church, to carry on his banner to the world. A woman in Bible prophecy represents a church. 12 stars represent the 12 apostles handpicked by the Lord to carry on his message of love to the world. His own race, the Jews, had rejected his message, choosing instead to cling to the ancient traditions of the past. The majority of the civilized world, however, was under Roman rule and thus primarily pagan. Gradually, as the years passed after Christ's sojourn on this earth, Christianity began to make inroads into the pagan monopoly. It spread across the Roman Empire and the known civilized world, even into Greece and the Middle East. The greatest sacrifice in history, that of Christ himself, abolished the need for continued sacrifice among the church people and priests. Daniel 12:11. This change took place very, very slowly. Sacrifices slowly began to fall out of favor as a practice. They were replaced by remembrances. The most common was communion, as performed by the priests and other church leaders. Christ himself began this tradition at the Last Supper in the upper room in Jerusalem. Christians in the first few centuries after Christ's death fell into disfavor, leading to a severe persecution. The degree and severity was determined on the leader and power. The most severe period of persecution may have occurred during the reign of Diocletian from AD 303 to 313. This period is described by John in Revelation when speaking to the 7 churches of Asia Minor in Prophecy 1. 10 days or years are spent in the most inhumane torture of the Christian thread. But as Rome's empire began to crumble, the Christian empire began to crystallize as the new world power and successor to Rome. This Christian power was of a new order. It gained world control not by brute force but by political and economic force. This was a novel but extremely effective method of acquiring power. This new power would dominate the Middle Ages in Europe not only religiously but politically. The time and times and half a time had found its king. The Christian church slowly gained strength. The Council of Nicaea in AD 325 was convened to attempt to define what Christianity was to be. The government and the church leaders of the day wanted to define the role the church was to play in the future. The result was put forth in the theory that God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are equals. The Council accepted this theory as doctrinal, and it was taught throughout Europe. The Nicene Creed remains in existence today and is utilized by many churches, even today. The Roman Catholic Church emerged as a leading Christian church, and through its backing by the state and its series of leaders or popes, gained full control of European religion. The Council of Ephesus in 431 added another major doctrine to the church. Mary was given the title Mary, Mother of God, or God-bearer. This new thesis lifted her to a new position above common humanity in the eyes of the church. Now that widely accepted common ground had been established for theological doctrine, the next step was to preach it. Priests and bishops of all varieties now could go out and teach basic doctrines of the church. This process of converting the masses from paganism and other sects to Christianity was a slow but successful process. There were 2 main reasons for this. Number one, it was a way of educating the masses of people, the vast majority of whom were completely uneducated. Secondly, the income these conversions produced was astounding. A tithe, or 10% of all earnings, was to be donated to the church. Additional special offerings were also accepted. The accumulation of wealth by the church mounted each year until it reached staggering proportions. With all of this wealth came power and inevitably greed. Unimaginable wealth poured in from all sectors of the country and society. The initial reaction of the church hierarchy was to build more places of worship. This was followed by the need to build not only more sanctuaries, but to build them bigger and better. Monasteries and other dwellings were also built for the clergy. The Roman Empire officially fell in AD 476. After approximately 500 AD, increasing numbers of European peoples and therefore increasing numbers of Christians were no longer subjects of Rome. It was no longer a Roman Empire. The Roman kingdom was split into 10 major parts along with many smaller states. Control shifted to the rulers of these states, but they could do little to enforce taxation, and thus many states were relatively poor. The bishops of the church, on the other hand, had money flowing in from all sides. Thus the bishops and their churches gained economic advantage and eventually economic control. Along with this economic power came increasing civil and eventually political authority. They now had the resources not only to sustain their church needs, but also civil needs. Water supply, construction, fortifications, and even war machines were funded by the church. When funds were needed for some new project, people did not go to the government, which was relatively poor, but to the bishop controlling the wealthy church. Thus, real authority was transferred to the church and its bishops. Government officials would complain bitterly, but were often powerless to do anything, as they could not offer the same resources. With the church so popular, any sanctions or efforts to strip the church of authority were viewed dimly by the church members. Jesus' admonition to his disciples and followers was to preach the gospel to all the world, and this church set out to do so with a diligence unprecedented in history. Not unlike ants, the bishops and priests swarmed over the world, working with a fervor that is only to be admired. Franks were converted from their pagan methods of worship by AD 500, and within another century Anglo-Saxon England followed suit. The seventh and last of the major religious councils again was held where the first one had been held in Nicaea. More theology and doctrine was hammered out. In addition to elevating Mary to the status of venerated being, the council now chose to deal with icons, an increasingly popular form of worship. They decreed that icons were theologically correct. This decree, among other things, was a boon to the church coffers. This council also decreed that the incarnation of Christ was genuine and not illusory, as the Bible repeatedly states. But they went a step further. It was decreed that material things had spirit-bearing potential and that in honoring an icon one could receive sanctification. This step now crossed a major line of scriptural doctrine. Commandment number 2 states, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image," Exodus 20:4. Or we can go back a little further. "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," Exodus 20:3. In AD 431, Mary was elevated above humanity, and now, 350 years later, things are also being elevated above human status. The age of unreasonableness was commencing. The age of reason was 1260 long years away. The long siege of the Dark Ages in controlling the minds of the masses along with their money had begun. Freedom of worship became a thing of the distant past, but more importantly of the distant future. The Jew during the period of Roman rule was tolerated by the Roman leaders, ridiculed, yes, but tolerated. Jews existed not only in Palestine, but all across Europe in varying numbers. As Rome caved in and Christianity took over, this coexistence became an impossibility. The Jews were offered conversion to Christianity, but in failing to accept, they were often expelled from the community. Therefore, the Jews, who killed Christ, were without not only a country, but without friends in the city after city and town after town. They maintained their religion by banding together as best they could. Some form of tolerance remained, but they were still a race without a country, until AD 1948. To complicate matters further, a new member joins the religious party. He creates further turmoil in the religious world of the Dark Ages. This new player causes a heretofore unheard-of schism. Muhammad, or as some call him, the pseudo-prophet, is born in AD 650. He develops a new approach in opposition to the Christian idea. He rejects Christ as God and demotes him to a human level. He calls Christ a great historical but not divine figure. God the Father is to be worshipped, and he, Muhammad, is to be venerated as the true prophet. The theological basis for this idea stems back to Ishmael, Abraham's other son. Mohammedanism began to sweep through the Middle East like wildfire. This new religion split Christendom in two geographically. The Latin or Western Christians remained loyal to the Pope as their leader, but being geographically distracted from the Pope and Latin Christendom by Islam, Greek Christendom turned away from the Pope and began to develop its own distinct theology. Islam was spread militarily as well as religiously. Greek Christendom chose not to have or recognize the Pope. They did not have one distinct leader, but many bishops assumed control of the Greek Orthodox movement. This Greek Orthodox Church was much more iconoclastic than the Latin Christian Church. As the Islamic flood began to assert itself, Greek Orthodoxy was forced to recede eastward. Buddhism and Hinduism also expanded as other alternative religions during this era, but they had little effect on the worldwide political scene. They were religions of peace and solemn worship. However, they too did not recognize Christ as God. The nickel has two sides, and the inevitability of new religions was a foregone conclusion. People were disenchanted with not only the Jewish religion, but Christianity as well. Corruption was widespread, and this disenchantment led to the need for a new and somewhat more nationalistic religions. Islam had gained virtual control of the Middle East and was also filtering into Eastern Europe and Africa. This infiltration by the Islamic religion put quite a sizable hole in the economic bucket of Latin Christendom. Something had to be done. An additional concern of Christendom was that all the major sites, shrines, and historical artifacts were no longer under Christian control, but were largely under the control of Islam and its leaders. The Mohammedans had Mecca to make their pilgrimage to, but good upstanding Latin Christians could no longer freely visit Jerusalem, where Christ lived and was crucified. This was unconscionable, and something had to be done. Therefore, the Crusades were devised as a way to take back the lost land and recover the Christian artifacts and mementos for the Church and its members. Armies were raised, funds were raised, and the Crusaders marched east.